Good evening, Mouse Rebel News fans. I'd like to welcome you to the first full show of Mouse Rebel News, because in the course of a week there's a ton of news stories that I would like to do, but I don't really have the time to put up an individual video on each one. So what I thought is, at the end of the week, Sunday, I'll just put up one video covering all those smaller stories that I didn't get to cover during the course of the week. And this makes some pretty good content, and it'll give just a little bit more flavor to the actual channel. Now, what I want to start with is the active denial system, the microwave weapon that's now being used against protesters. Let's be honest, mostly domestic protesters, people who protest the government, Occupy Wall Street mainly. It's a device that has a microwave emitter on top of a Hummer, and then will direct those microwaves towards people who disagree with the government. And let's face it, that's exactly what it's for. Now, the microwave emitter emits a 2-second burst that will heat the skin to about 54 degrees Celsius, or for those of you still stuck in the Stone Age, 129 degrees Fahrenheit. That's pretty goddamn hot. I don't actually know what 129 degrees Fahrenheit is because I grew up with Celsius, I grew up with the metric system, but let's just say it makes your skin feel on fire. So that's pretty damn hot. And I would imagine that's pretty painful. I guess it's actually questionable which one is actually more painful, being bombarded with microwaves or being shot with a taser. I've never been hit by either one, so I really couldn't say which one hurts more. As soon as you do know somebody who has been hit with both weapons, send me a message and tell me what. Now, here's the main problem with the weapon. More than likely, it will be used to torture people. One, you don't even have to be a hold of the person in order to do it. Two, you don't even have to actually be in physical contact with the person, which makes it very easy and kind of cowardly. At least in what will soon be the old days of waterboarding someone, you at least had to hold them down and pour the water over their mouths and noses yourself. Or you had to kick them and beat them yourself. But I mean, come on. This is one of those weapons that's definitely going to be used to torture people because, well, the people who use things like these tend to be tremendous cowards. It's the same way the taser was originally used. Now, police use a different kind of taser now, the one that's shaped like a 9mm pistol. And it has a device inside of it that records how long it was active and how many times the trigger was pulled, sending the electrical shock. Originally, those were not in the original first tasers, and some of the first police departments who did actually have a hold of the weapon were torturing people with them. Of course, they're unsubstantiated because nobody can really prove anything, but I would guarantee just about anything that they were torturing people with it. And then this new device came out which records how many times somebody's been shocked and the degree to which shocked and how long they were shocked. Now, I imagine there's probably something to that effect in the military system, in the vehicle that's firing the microwaves. However, I can probably be pretty sure that such information will be classified for national security reasons, and we won't actually be able to look at any kind of that type of data, which is exactly what I'm anticipating. So I'm pretty sure this is just going to end up using to torture people who have public demonstrations. The next G20 is going to get nailed with this. Occupy Wall Street is going to get nailed with it pretty soon. But the weapon, a non-lethal weapon, is not fully out there yet. It's still in the final stages of testing and is going to be out soon. Now, speaking of testing that weapon, 11,000 people have been tested on with this weapon. Now, the military study shows that there has been no permanent effects as a result of the weapon, and there has been no fatalities. Yeah, I'm not really buying it either. They said the same thing about the taser. It has no long-lasting effects and it's not fatal. Now, how many people have been killed by tasers? Now, that number just keeps growing and growing because of conditional factors that aren't well taken into consideration when they're testing whether or not a very, very expensive weapon that was paid for by the government to one of its friends to develop It's being tested. In other words, they're basically, if there was any evidence, they'd look the other way. Anyway, how many times we told that a weapon wasn't lethal and had no lasting effects, and it still does. And people are dropping dead from tasers. They're finding long-term health effects from people being hit with tasers. Now, let's take a similar principle and just bombard somebody's body with microwaves. Seems legit. Probably not going to be any... Not even going to bother with that. I mean, come on. We know exactly there's going to be long-term side effects, and people are going to start dying of it. Or people are going to start end up getting really sick and have neurological problems, problem with their nerves, problems with the organs, all kinds of things that can be caused by microwaves. So when they say there's been no proven long-term side effects or deaths, no, really not buying it. Although, one thing I would like to see is how Fox News is going to report this new weapon being released. Microwave emitter. Basically, it's a free heating of your hot pocket. I'm sure you're all pretty familiar with what it is I'm talking about. The pepper spray being, essentially food. Well, if that's true, then a microwave emitter is basically a free heating of your burrito or whatever it is that you happen to be eating. Turning now to Canadian news, it is my unfortunate duty to report to you that Canada, like the good little tool of America, has jumped on the screw Syria bandwagon along with all the other countries. Now, for the longest time, I've said actually very little on this situation in Syria, basically being that I didn't know which side it was that I actually supported because there seemed to be a lot of lies coming from both sides. And I didn't want to jump on until I knew everything. Like previously, like I did with Gaddafi. When I thought that the rebels were genuine, real rebels, I supported them. And then when I figured out that they were just imperialist puppets, I turned against them. Now, normally, it's hard for me to make a decision in a situation like this because I really, really want to make sure I know what I'm doing before I say it. However, in this case, it's proving to be even harder than normal. However, something now, this new actions by Canada have started to push me in one particular direction. Now, with all foreign governments, ones that have particularly been hostile to Syria and basically any kind of independence in the Middle East are now jumping on the side of the rebels, it makes me very suspicious of them. Canada has now joined the coalition of 70 countries that are going to be, well, funding the rebels and their actions against the Syrian government. Now, the Foreign Affairs Minister in Canada, John Baird, has made his announcement that Canada will be contributing $1 million to pro-democracy programs. Rather vague statement, pro-democracy programs. I think we know what pro-democracy programs are when it's coming from funding in the West to the Middle East. I believe the Iraq and Afghanistan wars were pro-democracy programs. Interference in all kinds of Middle Eastern countries have been pro-democracy programs. So you'll forgive me if I'm just a little bit suspicious of what it is the government plans to put forward through with our taxpayer dollars. You know, that money we don't have right now because of the budget and because of, well, a failing economy and the utter fail that is capitalism. Now, anytime the West tends to back up any kind of a group, it immediately makes you suspicious. When they were backing the rebels, I was like, And backing the rebels in Libya, I started to get a little suspicious of them. Well, then there was the whole thing about France and the weapons from the beginning, and then there was the NATO bombing started, and was like, okay. The rebels aren't actually real rebels, they're just people funded by the West. So now, because of this, because 70 countries have come onto a coalition against the Syrian government, is now, well, frankly, that's making me really suspicious of the rebels in Syria. And I've seen footage of a couple pro-Assad rallies now on YouTube of people supporting the Syrian government, and I'm starting to take that into account too. So I'm really starting to lean towards Assad on this one. I'm not believing that that nobody's dying or that nobody is really protesting the government, but it's made me very suspicious of the people who are doing it. Because remember, as the age-old right-wing axiom, if anybody protests their government overseas, they're heroic dissidents. Anybody who protests here is just a lazy liberal that doesn't want to work and have everything handed to them. Remember, there's no legitimate grievance against the government here, but overseas, every person who just even says a single bad word against the government is some heroic dissident that's standing up to a terrible fascist regime. Hypocrisy much? Now, there is something that Canada is doing that I do approve of. They're sending $7.5 million in aid. Now, if that aid goes to food, medical equipment, stuff like that, whether that goes to the government or to the rebels, I'm okay with that. Tents for people who've had their homes destroyed, food to people who are hungry, medical supplies to people who've been harmed, I'm absolutely okay with that, regardless of whose side they're actually on. Healthcare is a right, and I believe that applies even if it is to the enemy, regardless of who that enemy is. Because I would not like to be the savage that says to help people and then goes around hurting everybody on the other side. You can hurt people in war because that's the purpose of war, but the UN, Universal Declaration of Human Rights, does include medical care for anyone who needs it. And I absolutely believe in that. Even if someone is my enemy, they do deserve that. Now, I'm okay with that. I'm okay with $7.5 million going to aid, as long as that's not going into weapons. You know, if it's going into things people need to live, absolutely okay with it. But then I have to turn around and I have to listen to a conservative budget. And then I have to turn around and hear Sun Media, and Sun Media is basically the only one doing it at this point, screaming about how we're so short of money we need to defund the CBC. I thought we were short of money, but now all of a sudden we've got $1 million to throw away in Syria towards pro-democracy. I mean, I'm well aware of the Thomas Jefferson quote, even a single dollar spent on democracy is not a dollar wasted. Now, that would be true if that were what was happening, a pro-democracy funding, but I don't believe that for a second. I believe it's absolutely going to weapons for the rebels. It's absolutely going towards that. I don't buy this line that is for about promoting democracy in Syria or backing up the rebels. No, I'm just not buying it. It's going into weapons against the Syrian government. You know, if they were just honest about this, I wouldn't be so mad about it. But we are being lied to, but then again, we are being told this by politicians, so we it should be a huge grain of salt every time. I'm just sick of hearing about how, oh, we have to cut healthcare funding. Oh, we just have to cut healthcare funding. You know, we just don't have that much money. We got enough money to send to Syria. We've got untold tens of millions of dollars, if not hundreds of millions of dollars, to just freaking waste on Afghanistan. That might be the most expensive thing we're doing right now outside of healthcare and education, is wasting money on the bloody war in Afghanistan that no one's going to win. Even if the Taliban wins, really nobody wins. And that's a huge drain on our money. So why are we spending money on that? It's a complete waste. As long as it supports the imperialist puppets, as long as it gives America what it wants, our big brother, then it's okay to just waste unending amounts of money. And that's even just the stuff we know about. That doesn't even count the military operations that we don't know about. So it's kind of annoying for me to hear, oh, we have no money for education, we have no money for healthcare, and we're blowing it on Afghanistan. Excuse me, that makes me a little bit mad as a person who does require universal healthcare. As a person who defends universal healthcare, it makes me a little bit upset. Now, all of this is being done on the pretext that over 9,000 people, that's not a joke, that's literally what the UN said, over 9,000. I'm not trying to be funny, that's literally what they said. That 9,000 people, over 9,000 people have been killed in Syria from hostilities by the government. Of course, not hostilities between both sides, they just keep saying it's hostilities by the government, but you know, whatever. So over 9,000 people have been killed. And I'm a little bit suspicious of that because, as we know, last month the Arab League funded a report to find out in Syria what's really going on. Who's really been killed, how many battles have there really been, and how many casualties have there been in each battle. Now, the Arab League report came back, and they just ignored it. The Arab League report, which I will put in the description, showed that a lot of the so-called battles that were said to have been taken place by the Western media never happened. And a lot of the body counts and a lot of the incidents that did happen were exaggerated. Even on Syrian television, they say, you know, they report such and such person has been killed, then that such and such person goes on the state media, holds up their ID and says, I'm still alive. So I'm extremely suspicious of anything coming out of the rebel camp. I mean, after all, if the Arab League report is just being buried because they don't like what's in it, I mean, come on. They're not saying it's a disreputable study. They're not saying, oh, well, this is clearly biased against us, or here's the methodology and why it doesn't work. No, they're just ignoring it. So, you know, I'm a little bit suspicious just because of that. And I would think that if Canada, the Canadian government, who's spending my tax money, was really interested in defending democracy, instead of dumping $1 million in weapons to the Syrian rebels, maybe we should give about $1 million to Elections Canada so we can finally figure out what's going on with these robocalls. And I'm pretty sure we do know why that's not being looked into as much as it should, and why the Governor General is just kind of looking the other way. I firmly believe Stephen Harper is guilty. The Conservative Party is guilty of stealing our votes. But no, 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 no. Let's not fund an investigation into that. Let's throw it into Syria to buy weapons for the rebels. Welcome back. There's a very good story developing out of Toronto. The Fraser Institute, I'm pretty sure it's just a conservative think tank, has gone around judging all the schools in Toronto for which ones had the best marks and what was the average income in the area in which the study was done. If the school was in a wealthy area, how well did they do? If it was in a poor area, how did they do? And what was the average income of that area? Now, this was an exclusive by Sun Media, which is already suspicious. The study showed that, surprise, surprise, the wealthier an area, the better the students do. Of course, that was not the, or maybe it was the intended reason of the paper. Rich people smart, poor people evil, or dumb, or whatever it is that they were trying to say. However, in the top 5, there was one high school that was from a poor area that still scored in the top 5. Now, what was that? The name of the school was Dr. Norman Bethune Collegiate Institute. Now, pretty much almost everybody watching this video has no idea who that is. To let you know, Dr. Norman Bethune was a famous Canadian communist. And not only just a communist, a fellow Maoist. Now, I'm not implying in any way that the school being named after a communist means that the school did better. It didn't. In fact, that school has a particular different way of doing things that is what actually contributed to that. I just wanted to point out the fact that it was the school named after a communist that actually did better for the poor people, though appropriately enough, even though the name didn't actually have anything to do with it. For those of you who don't know, Dr. Norman Bethune was a famous Canadian doctor who invented a lot of medical tools that are still used to this day. One good example is the Bethune shears. He also, in the 30s, went with the anarchists in Spain and volunteered his skills as a doctor to help the anarchists in Spain. And during that time, he was one of the most instrumental people in discovering the different blood types. And while he was there, he also invented the mobile blood clinic, something that militaries around the world still use to this day. Afterward, he came back home and he became basically the grandfather of thyroid surgery. It's another huge feather in not only our caps as Canadians, but our caps as communists. After that, he went to revolutionary China and served in the communist rebellion against the nationalist government. While there, he died. He died of blood poisoning. Now, Mao recognized him as a hero. He's on some of the Chinese currency. The man is practically a legend in China. In fact, if you go to his house in Canada, in Gravenhurst, which has been preserved as a museum, there's tons of Chinese visitors. People who want to see the birthplace of Norman Bethune, or as he was called there, Bachun. The man's basically a communist legend, but, you know, he's not big and famous like Lenin or Marx or Mao or people like that. I just wanted to point out how funny it is that the top school from a poor area was named after a communist, and how the Toronto Sun Media, kind of just overlooked who it was named after when they published the article. I mean, come on. If it had been named after some famous conservative, they'd be all over it. They'd be like, oh yeah, that's the school, you know, named after such and such famous conservative. But the fact it was a communist made them completely overlook it. Just thought it would be funny and interesting to point out. For those of you in the know, in the past week, the Chinese government has cracked down on social media in the country, Sina blogs and Weibo, the Chinese Twitter. Now, the reason this came about was that some people set forth this giant hoax that there had been a coup in the Chinese government. The information that was put out saying that there was a ton of military vehicles in Beijing that were going at it, and that people were being thrown out, and there was this great upheaval, as Mao said, there was a great chaos under heaven. The situation is excellent. But none of it happened. There was no coup. There was no military vehicles. It was a complete fraud and a complete hoax made up, presumably just to destabilize the government or to cause, or basically just to cause trouble. Now, the Chinese government cracked down on social media, banned a bunch of things, and arrested 6 people that they say are behind this gigantic hoax. Now, of course, human rights people jumped up, started screaming that it's wrong and it's wrong. While it's not actually necessary to arrest these people, they do deserve public criticism for faking a coup. But I don't think it's necessary to arrest them or to even have the blogs shut down. But, you know, China is China. The restoration of capitalism has been pretty hard on human rights there. The Western media is going on about this, saying about how this proves that there's a crisis in China right now. Because recently, Bo Xilai was thrown out of the government. And he was a very popular figure. He was popular with the people. He was the closest thing to a Western politician, according to many media outlets. And they're saying that this is more proof that there's a political crisis in China right now, as they are set to change leaders about the end of this year. But I think that's mostly a complete fabrication. I don't think that there really is any political crisis. I think the only crisis that really exists is the fact that Bo Xilai was thrown out of the government. And there's a lot of rumors as to why that happened. A lot of people are saying it was jealousy by his opponents, or that he had actually done things that he wasn't supposed to be doing. However, there is one thing we do know. A former aide to Bo went to the U.S. consulate, spent a day there, and from reports, he tried to get political asylum. Basically, someone under his authority seemingly tried to defect to the United States. Now, if that happens to you, I mean, you can pretty much be sure that you're going to be looked at. I mean, let's just take for 1 second. Say someone like John McCain, who was a senator, and someone from his office jumped the border to Mexico or Canada and then went to the North Korean consulate and said, you know, I want political asylum, I want to leave. Could you imagine the scandal that would cause? Could you imagine what the media would say if someone under John McCain defected to North Korea? You don't think John McCain would be investigated? His office would be investigated? You know, powers in the government would be looking at him sideways? I mean, come on. The Chinese government feels that they can't trust Bo Xilai, whether he actually did do something or he didn't do something. One of his subordinates tried to defect from the country for whatever reason, considering that he could have just gotten on a plane and flown. The fact that he tried to leave under U.S. protection means that he was probably going to do something pretty big, or he had some kind of information that the U.S. government wanted. But essentially, pretty much they didn't want it that bad because they didn't actually grant him political asylum. But the situation being what it is, the fact that all this has happened isn't really indicative of anything. How many hoaxes about politicians come out of the United States all the time? How many in the West happen all the time, particularly the United States? The United States is particularly bad for that. Complete and utter hoaxes. Look at all this birther BS that came out that Barack Obama wasn't born here and all this other complete insanity, considering that it's not actually where the president is born that's really in question, but the authority that the office of the president actually has that should be under question. But, whatever. I mean, this situation is being blown into, well, basically nothing. It's being made out to be nothing. The only real controversy here is that Bojai office was obviously compromised. I mean, his subaltern possibly could have been a spy or anything else. But I mean, if that happens, you can pretty much bet that you are going to get investigated. And that's pretty much all the news I want to put out for this week. So stay tuned, because now every Sunday there will be a longer news show covering more subjects for all the stuff that I couldn't manage to fit in during the week. Thank you for watching.